I produced a video back in 2019 which took a look at the law in Scotland with regard to campervans and motorhomes parking up for the night in places other than official campsites. I thought I'd bring that video up to date just a bit because a lot has happened in the past 3 years or so, and I'm delighted to say most of what has happened is actually good news. Now, I'm not going to use the term wild camping simply because it kind of acts as a red rag to a bull to certain individuals who insist that wild camping is nothing less than staying in a tent in some remote area. And on the subject of descriptions in the context of this video, I'm going to use the term campervan and campervannings. Just to save me having to say, campervan or motorhomes or campervanning or motorhoming at every turn. So I hope you motorhomers will forgive me for that. Now, unfortunately, to a certain kind of individual, we campervanners are not exactly popular. But I'm pleased to say that in my experience as someone living in the Scottish Highlands and travelling a lot throughout the Scottish Highlands, the vast majority of folk in Scotland are extremely tolerant of us, or really couldn't care less about us. And indeed, despite attempts by one or two Facebook groups to try and convince the Scottish Government that campervanners are worse than the Black Plague, our politicians, tourism organisations and local councils are generally on side with our needs and reasonable requests for more and better facilities and infrastructure. Many local councils in Scotland have actually been quite proactive and have encouraged the likes of farmers, crofters and local community groups to set up airs or overnight parking places for us. And in the past couple of years there's been a massive increase in such overnight facilities, some of them with electric hookups, some with water and waste disposal, and some without. Some are simple, some are a bit more fancy. But they're growing in number. And for the third year running, Forestry and Land Scotland, that's formerly the Forestry Commission, will be running its Stay the Night scheme, and that starts on the 1st of April, when they open up some of the forest car parks in various parts of Scotland where we can park up for the night. And I'll put the details down below just for your own use. Now, much of this forward thinking has been down to the activities of CAMPRA, the Campaign for Real Heirs, and I can't praise their efforts highly enough. And we're seeing a huge increase in facilities, not only in Scotland, but throughout the entire UK, thanks to CAMPRA. And I'd really encourage you to check out their website. I'll put the URL down below as well, so please support them in any way you can. And before the social media chatterati come on and say we've perfectly good campsites and we should all be using them rather than parking up elsewhere or at the side of the road or wherever, let me just say one or two things. There are now periods in Scotland where it's next to impossible to just turn up at a campsite and get a spot. Many of these campsites are booked up months and months in advance. And sadly, the vast majority of them close down in late autumn and don't open again until Easter, shut all winter. And I'm afraid I have to say it, many of them are pricing themselves out of the market. Now, I refuse to pay £40 or even £50 for somewhere to park my van for the night, even if it is an all-singing, all-dancing campsite with all those things that I don't really want, like hot tubs, glamping pods and swimming pools. There are people who like these things. Many of us can't really be bothered with them. And okay, I accept I'm going around in an expensive camper van, but that doesn't mean I'm loaded. It doesn't mean I'm able to pay 40 or 50 quid a night to camp up. Some people will and do. Others want a facility that is less fussy, more simple, less expensive. Somewhere to stop for the night safely without disturbing others. Simplicity itself. Okay, one of the reasons Scotland has become such a popular destination amongst campervan users is because of the country's progressive access laws. The Land Reform Act, or the Land Reform Scotland Act, was passed into law in 2003, creating some of the most progressive access legislation in the world. But, and this is a massive but, here's the important point. These hard-won access rights only apply to non-motorised activities. Things like walking, cycling, horse riding or wild camping using a tent. The legislation also allows access on inland water for canoeing, rowing, sailing and swimming. Now the legislation does not say you can park up anywhere you like. And the rights do not extend to activities that are entirely based on the use of a vehicle, such as sleeping in cars or campervans, motorhomes or caravans. Now I'll discuss that further in a few minutes, but for the moment, there's also an important codicil attached to this access legislation. It is all about responsible access. And that word responsible is hugely important. We have a Scottish outdoor access code that's attached to the legislation and it's freely available. It's a bit like the highway code, if you like, and it lists all the responsibilities you have as a member of the public. But it also has all the responsibilities that landowners and agents have as well. The code discusses issues like dogs, lighting fires, not chopping down trees, litter and all those things that were covered in the old countryside code, if you like. And it's an extremely useful document. And I'd encourage every campervanner coming to Scotland to get a hold of a copy of that code. Keep it in your van. Check it out from time to time. I'll put details down below so you can get hold of a copy. Now, like many people, I use a campervan to take me to places where I can walk, cycle or paddle a canoe. I use the campervan for my overnight accommodation, usually in an official campsite when possible, but at those times of the year when campsites are closed or unavailable, or in places where there are simply no official campsites, I'm happy to spend the night parked in a lay-by or somewhere quiet off the beaten track. Now, when parked up like this, I don't dump waste. I don't leave litter. I don't light fires. And generally speaking, I arrive at dusk and leave early in the morning, first thing in the morning. Incidentally, I also buy fuel, I buy food and provisions from local shops, and if I'm near a pub that sells bar meals, then so much the better. A couple of pints at the end of a day's walking is grand. I contribute to the local economy, and I sometimes think that on campervan trips, my wife and I spend more time in local supermarkets than we do anywhere else. Campervanners spend money, and because of that, they are recognised as an important contributor to the Scottish economy. Now, I've been using campervans in Scotland for about, 45 years or so. And I've never had a problem when I've spent the night somewhere other than in an official campsite. Never, not once. The legal situation is this: overnight parking, whether in a lay-by or on a public road, is lawful unless a traffic regulation order is in place and provided you don't do any damage. Now, some of you might remember the old black on yellow no parking overnight signs that we once saw scattered throughout the Highlands. They were not covered by a traffic regulation order. It seems that non-prescribed signs such as those required special approval from the Scottish ministers, but there's no record, absolutely no record of any such authorisation ever being given. An enforceable prohibition of parking would require an appropriate traffic regulation order with signs and lines that comply with the traffic signs regulations. Now, some signs do exist in some car parks, but where they do exist, there should also be an explicit reference to the order. Most of these no overnight parking signs have been removed in the past few years. They were apparently advisory signs, merely advisory signs, and had no legal foundation at all. Now, apart from these old signs, campervans and motorhomes have been historically tolerated in Scotland. In many areas they've been positively tolerated, positively welcomed. But in the past couple of pandemic years, the burgeoning number of campervans, and in particular the burgeoning number of giant motorhomes and rental motorhomes, has created a friction in many communities, and in particular island communities, where large motorhomes take up quite a lot of space on ferries, often to the exclusion of islanders travelling to and from the mainland, going about their daily business. And throughout this hateful pandemic, a new phenomenon has been recognised. Over-tourism is when there are too many visitors and not enough local infrastructure to cope with them. Good examples include areas in the Isle of Skye during the summer months and the overly promoted North Coast 500, where there is a dearth of official campsites and suitable laybys and a lot of single track roads. Now, this lack of infrastructure has led to many motorhomes and campervans parked in laybys, in urban car parks, and beaches on an macher, and sadly, many of the owners have been quite irresponsible in the way they've disposed of rubbish and toilet waste. I think it's understandable that this has led to a lot of local recrimination, and that the traditional Scottish tolerance and welcome has been severely tested. It's really up to us campervanners to be aware of these sensitivities and to do what we can to desensitise the situations if we possibly can. Now, this means using our common sense, being careful where we park up. Don't try and squeeze into a lay-by when there's already 3 or 4 campervans there. Keep well away from folks' houses and don't park up for the night in urban areas. It's about treating others as you'd like them to treat you. It's kind of common sense. Okay, one more important point on the legalities of sleeping by the roadside in Scotland. While it's perfectly legal to spend a night in a lay-by on a public road in Scotland or on the verge of such a road, it is not legal to set up an encampment. That's a semi-permanent campsite, as many New Age travellers have done in the past, by camping in a lay-by or on a road verge for several days, weeks, or even months at a time. Now, this term encampment has been greatly misunderstood, sometimes deliberately, I suspect, by some officials, including those of one of our 2 national parks in Scotland, leading them to believe that there was no difference between such an encampment and someone merely stopping for the night. That's why I think it's important that if you decide to park overnight in a lay-by, you do so responsibly. Now, not surprisingly, the simple mistake has caused considerable confusion within the campervan and motorhome world. If you Google legal position of campervans parked overnight in Scotland, you'll read a host of out-of-date opinions and guff that's mostly misinformed and quite wrong. Now, I had a guy on to me today stating quite categorically it was illegal to park in a lay-by on a public road. Bear in mind that for whatever reason, usually envy or they've been held up for a few seconds on the road by a campervan and have a real grudge about campervans, people like to stir it, especially on social media, and make up fake news. And bear in mind too that the law in Scotland is different to the law in England and Wales. Up here in Scotland, we have our own laws, we have our own traffic laws. It's important to remember that. My own advice as a fairly seasoned campervan owner and long-time access campaigner is fairly simple. Use campsites where possible, and in areas where such sites are in short supply, use laybys on public roads, but try and move on fairly early in the morning. It's not unusual, to see motorhomes and car parks and picnic areas with the curtains and blinds still drawn from 11 o'clock towards lunchtime. Move on early. Let other people use the lay-by, the people who are going walking or general tourists. On roads without laybys, please don't park in passing places. That is a very big no-no. And bear in mind that while it's perfectly legal to park in a lay-by on a public road or on a verge of a public road overnight, it's certainly not legal to dump toilet waste or litter. That is the other massive no-no. You can buy one of these litter picks and clear up any rubbish left behind, and that would be a great thing to do. Let's be seen as a force for good and not as a problem. Now, despite the claims of the anti-campervan brigade, a minority in my opinion, there are many people working very, very hard to try and make your campervan holiday in Scotland a memorable, safe and happy one. These are people involved in campsites, those who run and who are establishing airs, folk in councils, local councils throughout the country, folk in statutory bodies like Forestry and Land Scotland, the folk on Campra, and even, believe it or not, some politicians. And we can repay these people for their efforts by campervanning responsibly, cleaning up after others where we can, and reporting those who won't obey the simple rules to the authorities. It's simple really. Leave things better than you find them. Take nothing but photographs and leave nothing but footprints. I hope you have a great holiday in Scotland, and if this video has been useful, it's been helpful in any ways, please think of subscribing to the channel. It does make a big difference. So have a great holiday, have a great summer, and we'll see you soon.